You're wrong. I am not going to quit my thru hike. I have been training, I'm mentally prepared, I've saved money, I've taken time off work. I am not going to quit. I am going to finish that thru hike. Oh, sweetie, I get that it's really important to you. I understand that you really expect to finish, but honestly, odds are you won't. In fact, odds are good you'll quit. We should talk about that right now. I know you really want to finish your thru hike. I've been there, and sadly the odds are against you for most long distance trails like the AT, the PCT, and even the CDT. Fact is, most people who attempt a thru hike don't finish for a variety of reasons. And I don't want you to think that that's a failure if you're facing that decision. It's an important decision, one that you shouldn't take lightly, and we're going to talk about some of the factors that go into deciding whether you should continue a thru hike or whether it's time to quit. When I decided to attempt a thru hike of the Appalachian Trail back in 2017 for a 2018 thru hike, I knew what the odds were, but I really didn't accept the fact that I might be one of those who wouldn't finish. I was bound and determined that come hell or high water, I was going to get through that hike. And it turned into quite an adventure. It was a hopscotch hike in the end. I had to jump forward and loop back and do all of these things. And I did make it to Katahdin, but at the end of the day, I had to actually say goodbye to my trail family and go back and hike some extra miles. I was hiking into November, right before Thanksgiving, and I just basically, quite frankly, ran out of time. Weather was setting in. I was in Pennsylvania, and it was getting really cold. And I decided it was just time to go home and spend time with my family and then come back the next summer to try and finish up filling in all of those gaps. So that was a gut-wrenching decision for me, and it really took a long time for me to get my head around the fact that I had, quote, failed. I felt a lot of stigma around that, and at the time, people really were not talking about not finishing their thru hikes. Since then, I've noticed that a lot of really high-profile YouTubers that you probably watch have ended thru hikes. Kyle from Kyle Hates Hiking has ended his PCT hike attempt not once, but twice. Dixie with Homemade Wanderlust, she finished the Arizona Trail in 1 mile, or should I say she quit the Arizona Trail after 1 mile. Kelly Hayes, she went out to do the PCT and she also stopped after a fairly short amount of time. And if you start looking around on YouTube, you'll see lots of people talking about why they quit their thru hike. I want to help you if you're planning a thru hike or if you're watching this from the trail. Think about the things that are most important to factor into that decision and then spend some time making it carefully so that you don't have regrets after the fact. I actually met Dixie last summer when I was struggling my way through the Colorado Trail. I was very sick. I had a respiratory infection that would not go away, and I took time off the trail, came back. You can watch all that up here on my Colorado Trail 2022 thru hike. But I ran into Dixie in Leadville as she was getting ready to go hike Mount Elbert, and I asked her, I said, you know, have you ever bailed on a thru hike? Thinking that probably she had, and I was going to ask for some advice. And at the time she said, no, I haven't. But in reality, you know, it hadn't happened to her yet, because this year, 2023, has not been one of her best years for thru hiking. 2022 was not my best year for thru hiking. Those things happen, and we're going to talk about what to do when it does. Now, so much goes into planning a thru hike that it can be really hard to accept the inevitable when you're faced with the fact that your thru hike is coming to an end earlier than you planned. You might feel like a failure, like I did. You might feel frustrated or maybe embarrassed that you went through all these preparations. Maybe you gave up an apartment, arranged for people to look after your pets and do all those kinds of things, anticipating that you were going to be gone for anywhere from maybe 3 to 6 months. For some folks on day 2 or at the end of the first week, they realize that that is not for them and it's time to go home, and they have to kind of tuck their tail between their legs and go home and admit to folks that, you know, I made a mistake. That can be hard on you mentally and emotionally, and it can lead to post-trail depression, which is real, no matter whether you've been out on the trail for a week or 6 months. Whenever you decide, or at least are thinking about calling it quits, I really don't want you to look at that as a failure. It's a decision. Failure obviously is attempting to do something and not completing it. So yes, technically I guess it is a failure to complete your thru hike. However, it doesn't make you a failure as a person. You are not a failure if you end a thru hike, if you make an empowered decision, a thoughtful decision that it's time to get off the trail. How about these fall colors? I grew up in Florida. My grandmother in Maine used to send me packs of leaves in the fall so I could put my face in them and sniff in the scent of autumn. But out here in Colorado, it's just absolutely gorgeous right now. So I hope you're enjoying this as a background. So as I mentioned, some people decide very early in a thru hike that it's just not for them. And I think that's okay, because if you really are convinced that it's not what you expected you were going to be getting, then why waste the time and the money to continue the thru hike? So go ahead and go home, rethink it. Maybe do section hikes instead. Do whatever works for you, and don't worry about the shame or the embarrassment of going home. We all make mistakes. Lord knows I've made plenty on the regular. Just go ahead and you know, let it go. Let it go. It's okay. So I'd like to take just a minute and invite you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you are a subscriber, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And if you're not, just hit that button down below, and you can also click the notifications to find out when I post new videos. I'll look forward to having you here as part of the Joyful Rambler community. Now, some people get a lot further along in their thru hike, at least a lot further than 2 days or even 2 weeks, and decide to call it quits. So what happens? You might be facing this decision if you've had an injury, particularly one that you've been dealing with for a while and it's just getting you down and it's not healing. You just need to take time off to either get treatment, see a doctor, or just rest. That is really a bummer, but it happens a lot, unfortunately. And then you might also be dealing with financial issues. You might have problems with family at home, not in a bad way, but you know, somebody at home might need you, or perhaps you're on leave from work and they need you to come back. I know, it's tough, isn't it? All of those things can happen. I've seen people get off the trail because they're lonely, because they're having a real hard time getting the food they need. There's just so many different things that can cause somebody to get off the trail mid-hike. But whatever the reason is, I think you need to determine first and foremost, is it something that's going to end your hike, or is it something that you take a little time off for and then come back? I know quitting a thru hike mid-trail can be really difficult, but the good thing is that if you do quit halfway through or a third of the way through, that you can easily break it up and go back and do another third or the rest of the trail at a later date. So if you're facing that decision, do what feels best to you. Don't feel any guilt about jumping off, especially if you've got to take care of family members or go back and make some extra money, things like that. That's okay. A lot of those things you just cannot foresee, and they do happen. I mean, life happens whether you're on the trail or not. And sometimes it's nice to check out, right, for 3 months or 4 months or however long your hike is going to be. You can't check out completely, right, because life calls and the people that you love sometimes need you, and that's entirely okay. So if that's the reason that you quit your thru hike, then it's okay to mourn the loss of that excitement and potential achievement for a little while, but you'll get over it. It'll get better, and you can always go back again and either start from the beginning like I did with the Colorado Trail this summer, or pick up where you left off. Just do sections if you like. Or even you might decide, okay, after a little time to reflect, that wasn't your favorite trail and you want to do a different one. That's okay too. Now, the third time you'll see a lot of thru hikers quit is getting towards the end of the trail. And this to me is the most heartbreaking, because they've accomplished so much, and for whatever reason, it's time to get off the trail. Very often this is money, you know, and it stinks to plan a 6-month hike and run out of money in 4 months, right? If you budget carefully, you can avoid that one. But a lot of times it's, again, injuries that have just been plaguing somebody for a long time. It can be very often the same issues that cause somebody to end a hike mid-hike, but then sometimes there are other reasons, like, what are the other reasons, Forrest? Very often the reasons that someone quits a thru hike towards the end relate to things like money or running out of time, which happened to me on the AT. Sometimes they just feel like they've gotten what they needed to out of the hike, and that can happen really anywhere along a long distance trail. If you go out there for certain reasons, like, you know, mental healing or to deal with some kind of a trauma in your life, sometimes you just feel like after a month or two of hiking and being out there in the wilderness that you've got the answers you need and it's okay to go home. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to be a thru hiker, you know, if you have ambitions of hiking the Triple Crown, then certainly you don't want to get off the trail if you don't have to. And sometimes it's just a life goal that you've been planning for years and years, and so you don't want to quit too soon either. So in those cases, it makes sense to take a little bit of time off the trail, whether you go into town or even just go home for a week or so, and think about the experience. And I mentioned in my video on getting mentally prepared for a thru hike, which you can actually see up here, several ways to build a support system to help you get through when the times get tough. If you're facing things like loneliness or exhaustion, sometimes somebody wants to steal the show. If you're facing things like loneliness or exhaustion at the end of the hike, then you have to make a decision whether you want to just kind of power on through. If you've only got 100 miles and it's only going to take you a week, it's probably worth it to go ahead and finish. If you live close to the end of the trail and you feel like, well, I can just come back in a few months and do the rest, then that's okay too. Really, really give it some thought, because there's nothing worse than seeing somebody who's ended a through hike that was the opportunity of a lifetime, with no opportunities in sight for them to come back and finish the trail, and losing that dream. I don't want that to happen to you. It is definitely not a shameful thing to quit a through hike before you finish, if you do so, as I mentioned at the beginning, for personal reasons, if it's a very informed and thoughtful decision. If you just quit because you're having a bad day, and I'm sure you've heard the saying, don't quit on a bad day. If you just quit for that reason, you could go home and a week or two later really regret that you ended that hike. When I was hiking the Colorado Trail this summer and I was having a lot of challenges, and I was honestly really surprised that it was harder this year than my attempt was last year, I got off the trail after I fell down a snowbank because it really, really shook me up. But almost as soon as I got home, I knew that I didn't want to be done. Fortunately for me, I live in Colorado and I was able to get back on the trail, but so many times people aren't able to do that. So please just take some time and think about your decision. Don't rush into it. And if there are forces that you can't control, things beyond, your ability, say you're not physically prepared for the trail, or you just can't afford to continue hiking the trail, or you have a loved one that needs you, maybe they've had an accident or some other kind of emergency and you need to be there to support that person, then go ahead, quit the trail, take time off, and then figure out if you want to go back again or not. Another thing to think about when you're making a decision as to whether you should continue a trail or not is whether you just want a different adventure. Some people I mentioned do decide that through hiking is not for them, but maybe it is for you. Maybe you really enjoy it, but you decide you'd rather, go on a rock climbing adventure or go sailing or some other thing that is calling to you, and that's okay. Go ahead and take advantage of the adventure you want. I'm a big believer that life is too short to spend it doing things that you really don't enjoy doing it. So if you've been hiking for a while and you realize your heart is just not in it, choose a different adventure. That means going back into the real world, taking a job and getting back to work, or if it means pursuing something else that's important to you. Whatever you end up deciding about staying on the trail or getting off, remember that what you take away from the experience is more long than how long it lasted. What I meant was what you take away from the experience lasts longer than the experience itself did. So if you've gone for 2 days, you probably learned a lot of lessons along the way. And if you've gone for half the distance, even when you do finish, which is pretty amazing too. And I'm not here to encourage people to quit, believe me. I'm just helping to prepare you for what to do if you have to. But if you decide to get off the trail, take stock of what you've learned. And some of those lessons, I think, don't really hit you till much later. And I have to say that when I struggled with completing my Appalachian Trail through hike, my goal was to finish the trail. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted the bragging rights, which are awesome, to be able to say, yeah, I through hiked the Appalachian Trail. And I also wanted to know that I could do it. But what I learned along the way was that I could do a lot more than I believed that I could. I didn't have enough faith in myself. And there were times where I would look at a mountain or a steep pile of rocks and think, I don't know if I can get up there. But I did. I persevered. And so I learned for myself that I had a lot more tenacity than I gave myself credit for, and that I could get through a lot more things than I expected, even when they were really tough. And that lesson served me very, very well when I got home, and less than a year later found myself going through a completely unexpected divorce after a really long marriage. I relied on my experience from the Appalachian Trail over and over and over again as I went through that really traumatic experience, and I came out on the other side, I feel like, a much stronger and even happier person in ways, although I really do still mourn the life that I had. That's normal. But my point is that no matter what you take away from the experience, no matter how long you hike, make sure that you spend some time reflecting on what you have learned and how that might apply to your life on and off the trail. Being a subscriber helps YouTube to know that my content is valuable, and it helps get in front of other people like you who can benefit from what I have to share. So hit that subscribe button, and if you want notifications when I post new videos, just click the bell. If you've got comments or thoughts on this video, good or bad, let me know. I read them all and I reply to as many as I can, so I really appreciate your input. So happy hiking, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.